spread it out, different asset classes, different potential operators. And also now that's part of my betting process too, on the active side, as to seeing how an operator performs, right? Both the experience side of it, the communication, the actual performance of that project.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
All right, welcome back to the Gentle Art of Crushing It Passive Investing Edition. My name is Randy Smith, and I am your host. And our entire purpose here today is to help educate and inspire the passive investor as you either begin your journey to passive investing or continue your journey in passive investing in real estate. So we have got a really, really exciting show here today. We've got Sam Silverman, who has done things beyond his years. So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast here, Sam. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, why don't we just go ahead and jump right in? Can you give the listeners kind of a Reader's Digest version or walk us through your path to passive investing?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it actually started on the entrepreneurial side when I was still in high school. So I built and sold a company my sophomore year of high school focused around event planning, and it actually ties into what I ended up doing for my corporate career as well. So if you look at the core function of that business, we'd have students in every school in the New York City area selling tickets to these kind of teen club events. Right? We get a DJ, we would get a venue, and we'd have students selling tickets on a commission-only basis. So started out running teams, about 50 or so salespeople in different schools selling tickets that were paid a cut of every ticket they sold. Ran a handful of successful events profitability-wise, and actually selling that company my sophomore year when I was 15 years old. Used those dollars, then pay for college, and kind of always had the entrepreneurial spirit from there. I just had no clue what I actually wanted to go do, right? So kind of what I figured is, while I'm figuring that out, go make as much money as humanly possible. So naturally, I went to sales. Originally, I wanted to be a lawyer. I found out I'm not the best reader to get through all that material. So Sales made a lot more sense, a lot less debt, and a lot quicker in terms of a path of getting to a place of financial compensation. So started out in the tech world, ended up being an SDR, which is the kind of entry-level role in tech. Your sole job is booking appointments in target accounts for more senior sellers. So that for a couple of years, really competitive environment too. Like the companies I was at were very, very, very great culture of competition, like healthy competition, people really busting their ass. So that was a place where it created some separation, right? Kind of month after month, I was the top percent of 50 plus people, right? Which helped create that level of urgency. And then kind of from there moved into more classic senior, sales leadership type roles where I've led orgs with over 100 people, and I've led orgs to hold, P&L balances of $50 million plus as well, right? So different types of roles, but all giving you clarity on the end in mind, which is get out as quickly as possible by doing things like passive investing. So on the real estate side, started in single family homes, like most people do. And there's a lack of education, right? Because what I thought of passive investing was you buy a property, you put a tenant in there, and you hang on to it until you're entirely sick of it, right? So that ended up being not how I chose to spend my time, right? So I really kind of dug deep and saw that the time spent and kind of headspace wasn't worth it doing single family homes. Like each transaction to make $200 in cash flow just wasn't it, right? Like that wasn't worth it for me. Because in sales, you really make your money on your commission, right? So if you perform really well, you can make 2, 3, 4x what they say you should make. If not, you're one quarter away from being fired, right? So it was always that balance of what's best use of my time and headspace. So kind of from there, sold off that portfolio in pieces, and then sort of moving it into kind of limited partner type investing in multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks, short-term rentals. And now we're just all over the place in terms of different types of deals that we do. But yeah, really just realized that it was for me as an investor, it was a free education, investing as an LP at first, right? That was very highly paid. So, and just fit much better with my lifestyle. Because to me, passive investing and kind of cash flow, you see it in two ways, right? One is you build it through sweat equity, and two is you buy it. And for me, I felt much more in the latter category.
Okay. So that is first of all, congratulations to be able to reach the level that you have in such a short amount of time. That's absolutely amazing. I come from the sales background as well, 25 years in corporate America, B2B sales. And it's interesting how you talked about rising to the top within that group, and sales is probably the best place to do that because you're judged every single day, not only from a sales result standpoint, but from an activity standpoint.
Black and white. I think that's what I loved about it too, is that, right, because I'm younger, I'm 28, and I moved up in sales pretty quickly. And in so many fields, your age matters, your background matters, and like in sales and the right organizations, it's not relevant at all, right? It is black and white. You perform or you don't. Like, as long as you perform and don't cause problems in the company, like, you're held in such high regard that your age becomes entirely irrelevant, right? Like, hold yourself well. But that was one of the few fields where you can move really quickly that is solely performance based in the right orgs. I'm sure there's orgs that are very political and things like that. I got lucky where I was, but yeah, like, that is a true measure of just, you do your job, you're measured, black and white, and you move on.
Okay, so let's dig into that point where young sales guy chasing around the stack rank, doing extremely well, probably making very, very good commissions, getting some recognition and awards and things as such, I suspect. At some point, you start looking outside of 401k or IRAs or something and start deciding that you're going to look at real estate. What did that process look like? Was it always in the back of the mind that you're going to jump into real estate at some point? Or how did you find that?
Well, for me too, like the 401k, the way I view it is complete bullshit, right? Like there's no better way of saying it, right? For me, like, I'm not working at 59 and a half years old to go wait to be in a lower tax bracket. Like, that's just not something I ever want to look forward to, right?
Yep.
So for me, I have personally zero money in the stock market, zero, not saying it's right or wrong, it's just how I view it personally. Nothing in 401k, nothing like that at all. I just knew my timeline did not add up to their timeline, right? In terms of the effort I was willing to put in to get there.
Yep.
Sorry.
So let me jump into that real quick if we can. So you went down the path of putting zero into the stock market, zero into a 401k plan. So I suspect you've had multiple conversations with people that said, why would you not put at least the minimum into a 401k to take advantage of the match that you're getting? So, have you had that conversation before? Or?
I have.
Okay.
I think part of it too is, even with that, they eat up in fees anyway, right? So like, it's not really a match. To me, what mattered much more so than a lot of things is, okay, how much cash flow do I need to feel comfortable leaving my job and doing what I want to do full time, right? It wasn't a matter of maximizing every penny. It was a matter of maximizing freedom so I can go focus on things I know will produce more for me over a period of time.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. And thank you for walking us through that too. So it's not a popular opinion to walk away from free dollars that a corporation or an organization
$3
will give
the
you
lockup
in the match.
period, right? So like, people don't realize too, is most is a 4-year plan in most companies, and ask any millennial if they're going to come here for 4 years and they'll laugh at you, right? Like, so mine was, I kind of done 2-year runs each place I was, because in sales, which I'm sure you have a period of time where the comp plan's good, you break it and you make the same, produce the same for half the money the next year, and you're like, okay, I'm all set. So I think it's kind of important to have that vision of, what does this look like both here and next year and the year after that? And is it a place that I want to go stay? And what has to happen for it to be a good place still, right? Because what you don't realize is that you perform well, your target just moves and your compensation bracket stays the same, which is a complete myth in sales. It's uncapped. Like, no, it's not. It's not capped in terms of the plan. It's capped in terms of what you can actually go produce in that given plan. So I think people can look at it differently. Like, just to go on a tangent here entirely, is if you're in a sales role, like, dig into the OTE versus the actual. Because I've had friends in companies that they just make $300,000, make $150,000. I've had friends who just make $150,000, make $500,000, right? So like, understanding where you're at as to what your ability is to go achieve those numbers directly ties into all this investing side of it, because that's your free cash to go play with.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And a lot of people in the sales space, they end up they don't want to break the comp plan. They don't want to make too much money because they don't want them to change the comp plan. One of the things that people used to give me a hard time, because there would be certain times when we would have new sales incentives, and if we made too much, they were afraid that they're going to change the comp plan. I always wanted them to change the comp plan because I made too much money. Let me be the guy that causes them to change the comp plan, because you'll get a 1 or 2 or 3 years where you get to max it out. So I love that mindset. Certainly hearing a mindset of abundance over scarcity from you. So I'm curious, has there been a lot of mindset coaching or mindset guidance or education or reading or anything like that you follow, or is that
Honestly,
part of what you're
not
doing?
really. So I had a really
Okay.
good boss. I actually worked for him 3 times, who he thought really big, right? Went into entrepreneurship right away, where he took on risk, both in terms of time and his own dollars as well, and passing up, 7-figure salaries as a CRO or kind of like head person in more corporate type companies, more guaranteed comp, less upside.
Mm.
So I've always seen that from him. But in terms of like true mindset coaching, like I haven't done it at all. I'm not a big guru type person at all. I think you learn by doing the work. Um, yeah, a lot of people want these courses or catalogs to go do things, and I
Sure.
think you can take a lot of things from books as well. Like I'm in no way someone who's like I'm going to go read a book a week, because you cannot implement a book a week in terms of tasks. Right? People who go do all this deep knowledge searching and implement nothing, like go use your time to do something else then, because they're just wasting it doing that. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you for that, because there is certainly a big population that chases the guru and the mindset. I think you probably learned mindset by watching folks with big mindset, by the leaders and the mentors that you surround yourself with, I suspect.
I also think it's a product too of being from New York City, right, where you're exposed to everything, right, both good and bad. You have such exposure to diversity of people, diversity of mindset. People have been insanely successful everywhere you look. So I think you see a lot just being from there, and you kind of have a bigger picture of what life actually is, right? Like there are people who grew up on a farm, and you kind of look at kind of where I am now in Tampa, Florida, where it's before, I'm sure you use this on like a salary map. You have tier one, New York. Tier two is like a Boston. Tier three used to be like an Austin, right? And now, Tampa wasn't on that map. Now we're like a borderline tier, 3+, 2-, right, in that bracket.
Sure.
So we've come a long way. But it's just interesting kind of being here, and you have people from the Northeast, you have people from other parts of the world too here, where it's kind of a middle ground city now. And for me, it's much smaller. For them, it's much bigger. So I think just there's like the perspective you have that you bring to the place you go. Not saying one's right or wrong, just more so what you're exposed to growing up. But I think being from New York, you're exposed to so much of just different levels of success of people. Like you're driven because of that, right? You see what's attainable. So I think everyone needs to go figure out where they can go see things that force them to think differently, right? Force them to go expand their horizon as to what's possible. Because people like put themselves in a box, like, okay, I'm doing this by this age, doing that by that age, and they may be aggressive goals, but a lot of people are very short-sighted on long-term goals, like very aggressive in the short term and very short-sighted in long term.
Okay. Yeah, gosh, I feel like we could dive in and probably have a whole episode just about that statement that you just made. But out of the interest of trying to keep it towards the passive
Sure.
investing community, let's talk a little bit, if we can, about that space where clearly you found that you weren't going to stay forever in a W-2. You made this decision to start pursuing real estate investments outside of traditional investments. What did those early investments look like? You mentioned some single families, but it sounded like that was pretty quick. So walk us through that if you can.
Yeah, so single family wise, actually a funny story. So I bought my first property in Roofstock, right? Like marketplace for single family houses that sell houses at a 3 cap, right? Like just pass those going forward. But found one that actually made sense in kind of up and coming area in Florida. And they try and keep the buyer and seller very private from each other, because that's their value, right? Where I found the guy on LinkedIn after the contract, like, hey, do you have any more properties like this? Up and coming area. He was a builder. Long story short, he had 9 more under contract that he was building that he was underwater on construction loans for. I'm like, okay, I'll buy all these from you in cash, right? One by one, delayed financing, pull the money back out of it. So I had, 150 grand, went very far that way. So I ended up with all those houses, and ultimately kind of realized that, to skip over a lot of pieces of it, to ultimately realize like why this just wasn't for me. I think I got a call at like at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday during a forecast call for our quarter, right? Like it was down to the wire. We're forecasting, seeing where we're going to land. And I had a tenant drunkenly drive over with their lawnmower, their sewer line, right? Which one, I'm not sure why that was out there and exposed. It wasn't when I left there. And just like having to go deal with that just gave me really good clarity on like, this is not for me. So looked at how I sell these houses. Luckily, the market wasn't a good place to go sell them at the time. Exited all those properties, and then started, doing the whole podcast circuit, right? Listening to all I can on real estate, different types of investing, and really just found that, apartments were super simple, Right? Like apartments are very understandable, very easy, not sexy, but stable. And I'm like, okay, like I can go write a few checks for 50 grand, put them into these deals, see how they do. At the very least, it's an education course on this kind of stuff. And that was the start of 2020. Started doing that. So almost 3 years ago.
Okay.
Since then, I've now invested in 43 different syndications or funds, all with a real estate focus. So really realized quickly that just the getting into better asset classes and with better, more experienced operators would wash out any kind of delta that I'm giving up to them in the deal, right? Kind of their fees, their split. By investing in really good people who have been there and done that, it made my life just dramatically easier. So now my life looks like every month I'm looking at reporting, distributions coming in, right? And there's that reporting. Once you kind of see it a few times, you can see you know go through the report in 30 seconds if you're familiar with it. So just lifestyle wise, it aligned a lot more to what I wanted to do and kind of leverage sales as that fuel to be able to go pump dollars into things like this.
Okay, so those first few deals, you said you wrote a few $50,000 checks. Did you put all of your dollars with the same operator at first, same asset class, same geography, or did you spread those around different operators?
I spread it around, right? Partially because I knew I wanted to be active myself one day in that space. So it's a lot easier calling someone for a favor when you've written them a check for 6 figures typically, right? That's a lot easier. People miss that step always if they ask without giving. And for me, that made it a lot easier to go do that. So spread it out, different asset classes, different potential operators. And also now that's part of my vetting process too on the active side as to seeing how an operator performs, right? Both the experience side of it, the communication, the actual performance of that project. So I got really spread out both in asset classes, locations, geographies, and then also operating partners as well.
Okay, perfect. So you're now in 43 different syndications. How many different operators have you partnered with?
Oof. 12, 13.
Okay.
And then there's a handful that I will work with until they stop work, until they go out of business, right? Like that, those people I'll work with forever now. So for me now, it's much more of a go slow to go fast type scenario, especially on the active side, where I'll really dig into someone in terms of their experience, their actual returns, right? Their references, their background checks, all those things that you vet someone from a, personally, right? If I lose my money, 50 grand, yeah, it sucks. I can make it back. If I lose someone else's money, that's a massive piece reputationally. It'll cost me, add a few more zeros on that long term.
Potentially, yep. Okay, so 43 operators. I would imagine there are
43 deals, so like 12-ish, 12-ish.
So if you were to sum up what you don't like about some operators and how they are working, what would be some of the watch outs for our listeners to look for?
So one is just the communication style, right? Like how buttoned up are they in their communication? How repeatable is it? How often is it? How quickly do they address things when shit happens? Because what people don't realize is that, say the average deal you invest into is a 5-year hold. Even if that deal becomes a home run return-wise, there's going to be some scenario in that 5-year period where things blow up. And you want someone who's just very stable and rational and tells you what's going on, right? Like people who are not emotional. I think there's, you do not want their financial lifeline to be this deal. Right. So like if things go poorly, they start pulling from the deal. They have, you want big stability, both personally and financially outside of that project. But yeah, the biggest thing of how I look at this, there's 3 things that matter in a given deal, right? One is the operator, right? The who matters in every scenario, especially in sales, right? Like your teams, your who matters much more than anything else. Like you take a good salesperson, they can go sell anything or, in the right environment. The second is the kind of asset class or market that you're in, right? Does it align to your goals? Say it's multifamily. Is there job growth, population growth, job diversity? So you think back to Detroit in the car manufacturing era. So that doesn't happen, right? Things like that. And kind of lastly, it's the deal itself. Like there are partners I've had that I invest in every one of their projects. And I look at the deal kind of as just, CYA for my investors. But personally, my money, I would throw it in there without even thinking twice. Right. I think that's a big thing. It's just that level of trust with people matters more than anything else. Like there are operating partners I have that I've done, 5+ deals with that I can leave an envelope there of $5 million in a mixed match duffel bag and go back then and be the exact same thing without telling them how much it was. That level of trust to me matters so much, is that you want to know when things get really bad, right? The last few years has been a really good stretch. You want to know when things get really bad, that they're going to operate both ethically and responsibly with both yours and your investors' capital.
Okay. Thank you. I think you summarized that extremely well. And obviously, you've got a ton of experience doing this 43 different times. So I'm curious, what are you concerned about right now with the way the market is going and some of the trends that you're seeing in the different asset classes? Or are you concerned about anything at this point?
So I think a big thing that's not talked about enough is just investor expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, take for example, we've seen some deals that we bought at an X cap and we sold at a lower cap than we purchased it, right? That should never happen.
Right.
So we saw things that happen where we're doubling money from investors in 12 to 18 months. So their expectations of hitting a pro forma and an actual 5-year plan have shifted. So I think the expectation piece is really important because you need to measure things in tranches versus measuring them in different time periods. And what I mean by that is that when you look at an operator to go evaluate something, it's how do they perform versus someone else in a given tranche similar to what they're doing. Say they do Class A multifamily in Florida. You need to go compare them to someone who's doing Class multifamily in Florida versus different scenarios. So right now, I think my outlook's changed a little bit, right? Where I'm looking at stuff that's going to hold for at least 4 or 5 years, and definitely has fixed rate debt for 3 years plus, right?
Okay.
Historically, we've seen the interest rates come down from their first increase in a year and a half, 2 years historically. So that's a big driver of things now is just the debt market. So as long as you're not a forced seller because your bridge debt's coming up, where you have to exit and go to a new loan product, your floating rate is not capped in a certain way. You're like right now, I want to be in projects that have no path to being a forced seller, right?
They have I'm sorry, say that again.
No path to being a forced seller where you have to exit a property, right? Because if you look at it historically, the fundamentals outside of the debt market are still really strong in many scenarios. So that's the biggest thing I think we're seeing is that if we can ride it out till a period where the debt market restabilizes, right, or just stabilizes in general, I think we'll see things go to a stable place, right? Versus I personally don't want the exit in a year for 2 extra money. I'm fine with the 3 to 5 years, right? So making sure we get to a place that's consistent. I think we have a lot of money that was put into the economy that needs to be sucked back out of it for different stimuluses from the .com bubble. Like there's still a lot of that carryover. So to me, it's just getting scenarios where you're not a forced seller, and that's between the debt, being well capitalized enough for reserves and operational expenses, and then just not buying overly priced projects that don't make sense to go buy and kind of forcing yourself to do deals. I think being in a role sort of mind where you're more of a capital allocator, you can be really selective as to what deals you get into because of that. Right now, everyone's fighting for capital from investors. So you have more leverage to get better terms for investors, more leverage to find the best deals, and be very, very selective as to how you allocate.
Awesome. Very good. So from what I understand, you've had some recent changes in your employment. Similar to myself, I shifted from a growth investor to a cash flow investor. Have you made any shifts due to your recent exit, or has that shifted your strategy in any way? So, and actually, maybe were there any changes in your strategy leading up to that point as well?
So I think leading up to it, I've freed up more liquidity than I normally would have on hand, right? Okay. Because for me, I work well under pressure, but not under personal financial pressure, right? Similar to what I was saying with the operators is that I will then be in a good place personally, financially, so they're not making decisions based on the income of the project. I want to make sure I'm in the same position to be able to speak that to my investors. So for me, I freed up a lot more liquidity than I normally have, right? So had some exits and did not reallocate capital. And I've shifted much more to tax efficient investing, where for me, having real REP status, where you can actually use those losses from a syndication or a fund against other income, right? Because all kind of bundles together that way because of my tax status. I've looked at more of how do I keep more of my dollars. So it's shifted to heavier depreciation assets like mobile home parks and RV campgrounds, and in deals that we don't plan on selling. So much longer term holds versus wanting to flip, right? Because as a passive investor with a W-2 job who's not actually using that cash flow or depreciation, I'd be more concerned with, cash flow is nice to see from like a mental standpoint, but your money's in the equity always, unless it's like a longer term hold. I love seeing the in and out in 2 years, exiting, reallocating those dollars. But now being kind of the situation I'm in, I like the longer term holds, the stability of those projects, the refinances that are non-taxable, and the no big recapture or depreciation that I use to avoid taxes, right? So it's shifted in that sense. So definitely cash flows become more relevant. Depreciation has become a lot more relevant, and then also hold time has been a lot more relevant too for me.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that you're leaning towards some of these other strategies that potentially have higher cash flow, longer term holds. That
And
makes a lot of sense.
it's also a thing right now too for me is that like I don't need home runs personally. Like walks,
Mm-hmm.
singles, a double here and there is fine.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest thing is don't strike out, don't hit double play, and you're entirely fine, right? Because once you're in a place of stability, it's those home runs are great, but a home run to risk your portfolio is not. So I'm much more gearing towards conservative type projects that will be within a few points of their projections, right? Versus the ones who have the home potential, for the reason
Okay.
that their floor is much higher.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Okay, so you personally, I know you've become a little bit more involved in some of these deals, taking an ownership stake, and um, as you've made that transition, has there been any benefits to you outside of the financial that you think that you've gained by stepping back into the active space?
Yeah, so I've gone really deep in a few key areas, but all things around investor, deal structure, fund structure, legal. So for me, I think a really big thing just with anyone in general is find things you actually enjoy doing, so you can get really good at those few things. Like I have not gone wide in where I focused on operationally. I've gone very deep on all things investors, right? When you look at, speak the investor side of it is probably a handful of people invest in more syndications than I have who've been around for years. Other than that, I've probably done quite a few relative to most people. So from being able to speak to you from the investor lens, but also the operator lens, I think helps a ton for investors to get that level of comfortability. Because the way I think about it is like my job now is just give investors all the information they need to make a decision, yes or no. I'll never force anyone to go make investment. One, we just don't need their money. But two, it's more a matter of indifference. And I think it's really powerful for them to have something they feel comfortable with. It's not push them to go do something. So the benefits, I think one of the biggest ones is that if you're investing 100 grand into a project, you've done something right, right? Financially, career wise. So my conversations every day are a blast. I talk to entrepreneurs, I talk to sales leaders, I talk to doctors, lawyers, athletes, right? So like it's fun to do that. I think one of the biggest things too is like I'm only on Zooms or video calls for podcasts or interviews now. Like I can take all my calls, walk around outside, right? Like I think those are just big things that I appreciate a ton.
Sure.
Yeah, the biggest things really just helped me kind of align my life personally and how I want it to go look. There's much less things on my calendar that I'm like, oh, I have to do this. So like now is the
Yeah.
biggest thing of like, I look forward to doing what I do each day now instead.
Awesome. Awesome. So what's next for you? What are you looking at? What gets you excited right now? What are you investigating to add to your portfolio or to what you're focusing on?
Yeah, so we put a really heavy focus on short-term rentals the last while
Okay.
for the reason that I think you're basically compensated in an in proportionate way for vacancy risk, which I love right now, right? So I think it's a really early asset class in institutions. So say, for example, you're a financial institution wants to go write a check for $50 million. Multifamily, we can find one apartment complex, buy it tomorrow, right? Self-storage, you have portfolios, do it all day long. Mobile home parks, we're not getting there. We've seen cap rates compress to a point where valuations have gone up really aggressively. I think the STR space is next, and it's insulated for a few reasons, right? One is that you take an institution, you have to go buy a single family house, go, renovations, construction, design, staging, branding, getting it live, right? So it's not a quick lift to go get a portfolio of properties live from the acquisition standpoint as well. So I think that space is very insulated. I think we'll see institutions pay a premium on valuation for people who can go consolidate portfolios really well. So that space I love right now. Mobile home park space I've loved for tax purposes, right? Like essentially that space becomes a land lease in the future, right? Basically leasing a plot of concrete where they're parking their home that costs roughly 1 year of rent to go move. So they're probably not going anywhere.
Right.
So like you have those things that are just really stable. Yeah, I think kind of you look at what's next, just keep scaling the businesses today and can help more capital raisers start as well. I think it's a great field for people who are in sales leaders kind of to go convert to and kind of tap their network. So that, and then a ton of travel.
Okay. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit on some of my final questions. I'm curious about the short-term rental space. Do you think that the institutional capital will have an appetite for an asset that potentially is not standardized, has a lot of variation?
We have term sheets for mid 8-figure checks, 9-figure checks from handful of PE and institutions already.
Okay, so they like the asset class as well. And how big does the fund need to be before institutional capital will start taking a look at it?
I think it's more so like in multifamily, you can use a T3 to go for valuation. I think we want to see a T24 to maximize dollars there. So like we've seen assets sell on projections like AirDNA, which to each their own. But I think what we'll need to see like the true highest valuation is 24 months of proven revenue. So there's sizable interest right now. I think it's more so getting to the place where keep scaling the portfolio that way.
And as you gain scale in the STR space, how do you add scale to that with it seems very high touch, like high management, labor intensive. Like how do you add scale to that? Okay.
So a lot of technology. We brought PM all in-house to this as well, right? So we have a full team in-house that runs this, but it's all leveraging technology to be a lot more efficient with how you manage. And we're in a variety of markets too right now too, right? So it's not as if we're all centrally located, right? So we're managing remotely in a variety of markets and have just partnered accordingly to do so.
Okay. And I think the thing, because I owned a handful of single families across a couple of different states at one point, and the biggest challenge I had with those were repairs. So as you start to have, it seems like it would make sense to have more consolidation in geographies just so you could have headcount for repairs. But as you spread these across multiple markets, how do you manage that piece of it?
Yeah, so in short, when you first enter a market, there's some trial and error, right? A lot of hiring and firing people. But you'll find, especially if they know your plan, I think it's really important to help people understand your intentions before you start, from the standpoint of you're not interviewing right now for one job, you're interviewing for the next 50 jobs we'll give you the next 6 months. So I think it's important for them to understand what your intention is going forward, right? Like it's almost a proof concept for them as, hey, perform well. We'd love for you to be our preferred vendor, our preferred partner in this area to do these different tasks, right? So they see it as it's almost a full-time job that I can, they'll pay me well and they'll pay me for time-bound performance as well. So just making sure they view it as this isn't just one job helps a ton.
And do you find like as you're growing this group, are you trying to create any type of niches in this space, or are you trying to create like a cookie cutter STR experience, or is there some special theme that you're
actually data? So if you look at it, data shows that people would rather go rent from a single person when their picture is on Airbnb versus seeing Vacasa or something like that, right? One of the big branded firms. They'd rather see a woman and they'd rather see a single person on there as well, right? In terms of how they book.
Okay. So you guys have
more of the local experience, more welcoming, more inviting, with a single woman who's on the profile of it from the data that we pulled internally and kind of ran comparison tests against it.
That makes sense. Yeah, no, definitely. If we're looking for the living in like the comfort of living in somebody's home type of feel with a short-term rental, we're not going to want to necessarily rent from corporate America, I guess. So interesting. We would just go to a hotel if that were the case, right? Interesting. Okay. So short-term rental, you mentioned mobile home as well, or RV park, which is an interesting space I'm hearing more and more about. Can you talk about that space a little bit?
Yeah, and RVs can go a few different ways. Like there's kind of extended stay RV parks, which kind of operate similar to a mobile home park. And you also have, like the year-long leases there. You also have more of the kind of campgrounds that are vacation sites where people actually pull up their home there or they stay for periods of time. And you kind of have the transient type piece of it as well, where it's much more of kind of a short rental type play, but with just lots, right? So the amenities play up there. Seasonality is really heavy in certain areas there as well. So they operate very similarly, right? Kind of like a sister relationship. But But yeah, mobile home parks are typically longer stays. RV parks are kind of split. You can adjust however you want to for a park based on either short-term or long-term housing.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know much about that space. I have a couple of friends that are getting into that space. It seems really exciting. Actually, I have somebody who will have on the podcast that's getting into the glamping space as well.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think
there's all kinds of fun things you can do.
And I think we'll see on the kind of mobile home park and RV space too, is that it's a very mom and pop type space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not these operators who own $10 billion plus of mobile home parks, right? Like consolidation in space is huge too, because institutions don't want to go call local sellers for a $5-10 million transaction. It's not worth it. So there's a lot of value in terms of, not properly priced assets in the market that were people have owned forever and they feel like they're getting a big payday, right? You're giving them a win, but it's also a win for you with potential for your investors too.
Got it. Okay, very good. Well, it looks like we have approached the half-hour mark here, so I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. But I do want to ask if, as you're talking with new passive investors, if you were to give maybe top 3 things or first things they should be looking for as they begin their journey in passive investing, what would you suggest to the new investor?
So I think interview some sponsors, right? Go listen to podcasts like this, find people who you'd be interested in their philosophy, their kind of thought process around this, and interview them. And there's all these numbers you can go look to use for it. But I'll give an example of how my first piece of this goes is that I manage my entire mom's portfolio for her. And my first thing, if I talk to someone like, would I put her money there and feel comfortable about it? If the answer is not immediate yes with a gut check, like we're all set. So there's all these numbers and data you can go look at, but it's the gut check piece that matters to me so much. So I think that's one side of it. 2 is kind of understanding your situation, right? Say, for example, you're 50 years old and retired, you probably have different types of needs and investment style and process and thought than someone who's 35, working up the corporate ladder, plans to do it forever. They can go take on different levels of risk, timelines, whole periods, right? All those things that kind of tie into an investment that shows it's right for you. And then 3rd is just find people that like excite you to go work with as well. Right now, like these like gimmicky people, but like people who you understand kind of their process behind it, right? Because there are people in the space who like I'll do deals for 3 or 4 years, get to a place of X, and I'm done. And then people who are like, I want to go build a company that I can go take public. And for me, I want to go invest with the latter because that's how I view it myself. Where certain people are like, okay, if I can go with a good 3-4 year run, I'm done. And they can go do whatever they want. Like for me, I want to be with people who think really, really big because that's what excites me and inspires me personally. So if I get more exposure to people like that, I think there's a lot of potential for us to do a lot more cool stuff in the future.
Okay, great. Well, let's do this real quick. I have some normal questions that I'm actually going to skip on because I just kind of want to jump down to the last one. We've hit more time than I normally do. So let's, can you tell us a bucket list item that you recently checked off your list?
Oof. So honestly, I think the biggest one was just not having a corporate job anymore, right? Like as
That's
simple as that sounds, it's just, just not doing things that I don't want to go do. And there are parts of corporate America that I loved. And there are also a lot of parts that just weren't for me. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then other bucket list stuff that I plan to go do is just a ton of travel, right? So when I left my job, I was to do 20 countries between like 2 months before I left my job and the end of next year. So we got 4 off the map so far, and then we'll hopefully cross a bunch more off of this coming, next 14 months.
Awesome. So what's next on the list then? What's the next trip?
So Japan recently opened back up for people in the States. So likely trying to do a trip of Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia. So that kind of clumped those 4, maybe a 5th country out there together. So I'm going places where I can go check off a few places at once and kind of hop around one-way ticket and not be rushed, which is just, that's a huge thing for me is I hate feeling rushed in any scenario. I work fast, but I don't like being rushed.
I love it. My wife and I were just in Spain, and I had to take the ferry across the strait to put my foot on the African continent as well. Just to say that I did it. So we'll have to go back and see more of it, but I can check that off the box anyway. So
I know I was very good. 2 years ago in Crete, the furthest island south in Greece, right before Africa, and I corporate job ran out of time, I would have loved to have taken that ferry down there and gone. So yeah, totally get it.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I think you've brought just a ton of value. Clearly, you're extremely experienced in this space, and you know what I like about what you're doing is you are very educated and knowledgeable across multiple asset classes. It's not just one single asset class that you're throwing all your money at. You've thrown it at multiple asset classes. I think the audience learned a tremendous amount for you. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Outstanding. And to our listeners, thank you again for joining us today. Join us again. We'll have another issue of the Passive Investing edition of this podcast coming to you next week. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.